Hey, it's good to have you in worship today. I hope you can sense that God is up to some things in our midst, and we're grateful for that. I do want to let you know that today, Linda Renfro, who's our missions coordinator, she's actually at Portageville Church of God preaching at the morning service. Brother Bob down there, he called me up and he said, hey, do you know anybody who might be interested in coming and doing our Faith Promise, which is sort of a missions event? And I was thinking 30 people in the cafe, little group of people gathering together. And I said, Linda would be great. Linda called me right later and said, what have you gotten me into? I was like, I'm sorry, I really didn't know. That's what he was asking. But today there is one from here, which we're grateful for. She is down there telling the story of how Jesus has changed her life and how he has sort of captured her heart, and her love for Jesus has deepened in his message in this world. And we need to give glory to God for the good things that he's doing in our midst. We're grateful for that. And we bless her, We're like, go and preach the word. Down there. We're grateful for that. Also, I'm grateful 70 folks in here, at least 70, a few more than 70, have committed to reading the story. And some of you purchased the story, and some of you are just following along with sort of the handout. But I'm excited about that. Because that's 70 people who are hungry and thirsty for God. 70 people who are devoting some time and some energy simply to reading the Bible and trying to figure out, well, how does it connect to each other itself, and how does this thing connect to me? 70 people who are sort of positioning themselves, opening themselves to be moved and inspired, maybe even changed by God and His Word. The Bible says, for as the rain and the snow come down from heaven, do not return there until they've watered the earth. They make it bring forth and sprout and give seed to the sower, and they bring bread to the eater. So shall my word be that goes out from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish that which I purpose and succeed in the things for which I sent it. 70 people out here in this faith community welcoming God's word into their soul, welcoming God to accomplish His will. 70 people. Seems to me that Jesus changed the world with 12. What could he do with 70? I'm pretty pumped about that, church. Now, as we make our way through the story, which is what we're doing, we're taking some time and we're thinking in terms of the upper story, just sort of a little introduction here. And we see that God has been up to some amazing things ever since the beginning. That God has this big idea, this sort of grand idea, this vision, and it's all good news for us. If any of you want to have life abundant, if any of you want to enjoy life forever, then become a part of my masterpiece, this grand masterpiece that the Creator is painting. We also have the lower story. These individual episodes in the Bible, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Sarah and Rebecca and Rachel and Leah and all this stuff. And we are people of the lower story. That's where we live. We live down here. And we deal with breakups. Right? We deal with conflict here in this space. And God meets us in our lower stories, and He offers us His help and His wisdom and His guidance. He enters our lower story, and He applies His healing balm to our physical and emotional wounds. And you can even see this upper story and lower story in the Lord's Prayer, right? The upper story, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And then it switches to the lower story. Give us this day our daily bread, right? And forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. And so I think thinking in terms of the upper story and thinking in terms of the lower story and thinking in terms of my story, it sort of helps us see how all this fits together. Another way for us to think in terms of the Bible overall is to think in terms of movements. Many symphonies have 5 movements. And so we have movement 1, which is the story of creation from Genesis 1 through Genesis chapter 11. Movement 1. Movement 2 is the story of God's people, Israel. Genesis chapter 12 all the way through Malachi. Second movement. The third movement is the story of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Third movement. The fourth movement is the story of the church from the book of Acts all the way through Jude. And then the fifth movement is actually the new garden, the book of Revelation, kind of a new beginning, becoming what God wants us to do. And so we started with the first movement, and we talked a little bit about creation, and now we're just at the beginning, opening measures of the second movement. We're going to be here for a spell, as they say, right? Now, today we're going to talk about Joseph, and it's a big old story, but we're going to go for it. And his movement from slave to deputy Pharaoh. And things don't always work out as we expect. Thank you. Things don't always work out as we expect. James was in college, and he had this grand idea for a business called a college card, 1987, and he actually got somebody to invest $30,000 in his idea. How he did that? I don't know, but he did. And he started this college card, which was kind of like a debit card, which offered discount to every store that accepted the card. We know kinds of things like this today. In addition to the debit card side, he also, on the other side, ran a delivery business, kind of two-sided business here, where he delivered everything from pizza to, gyros. I'm not sure what he was actually studying in college, but he was a very busy boy that semester. And so at the movie theater, for example, if you used your card, it was like this beautiful opera house. It gave you 75% off the ticket, right? But the reason is because the movie theaters make their money on the popcorn, right? That's where their money comes from, not from the ticket. And so in any event, they made their money on the popcorn. And college card, this idea of his lasted one semester. It did not work out. It went bust. James also had this girlfriend named Tracy. One evening, she took his popcorn from him, and she threw it all over that same opera floor house, and she shouted in anger just before the movie began, "I hate your popcorn, and I hate you." Things don't always work out as we expect. Nice little date tonight. Didn't work out like I wanted. Now, Joseph is the youngest son and really blatantly favorite. Everybody knows it's Papa's favorite son, and Papa is growing old. His name is Jacob. Jacob is Isaac and Rebekah's boy. That's how we say it around here, isn't it? Right? Isaac and Rebekah's boy. His grandparents are Abraham and Sarah. So Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Joseph is the youngest son. He is perhaps a bit spoiled, and Joseph has been given this beautiful coat. Many of us have heard this story, right? And he proudly wears it everywhere he goes. And his naivete, he doesn't really realize how much his brothers disdain him for the coat. Joseph is also a dreamer. He has these dreams on a regular occasion where the elder is bowing before the younger, and perhaps he's living in some fantasy world. Maybe he's a little sort of wide-eyed optimism, I don't know, but he foolishly shares all of these dreams with his older brothers, who respond a bit differently than he expects them to respond. One day, brothers are out with the flock, herding, sheeping, shepherding the flock. Jacob sends young Joseph, "Go find your brothers, see how they're getting along." And sort of Joseph is searching, and finally the older brothers see him from a distance. Why can they see him? He's wearing that coat of many colors. He's coming along the way. And they sort of get together themselves, and they say after some debate, well, let's decide, let's put this punk in his place. Right? This bratty little brother. And so they kind of debated. Some wanted to kill him. Some said, no. But when he arrived, they seized him. They stripped the coat off of him, and they put him in a pit to die. The youngest brother there to die. And they feel a little guilty about this. Right? Shouldn't probably do this. So when this traveling band of Midianites comes by on their way to Egypt, they say, let's sell our brother. And so they sell him, and off to Joseph falls in line with this caravan. His coat falls into some blood. Y'all remember the story? And as he heads back to the unknown Egypt, his brothers go back to the familiar, and they show their father this coat, and father is now grieving. And what brought Joseph all this joy, his coat and his dreams, brought his brothers jealousy and hatred. Things don't always work out like you expect from a favorite son to a slave in Egypt. Once in Egypt, Joseph is purchased by Potiphar. And he's one of Pharaoh's officials. And every task assigned to Joseph thrived. I wish my life was like that. Everything you put your hand to succeeds beyond measure. So Potiphar put him in charge of more and more and more. And each time, each project flourished. Young Joseph is handsome. Potiphar's wife has her eye on him. And she wanted him to lie with her. Come lie with me, she said. Spend an hour or so together here while Potiphar is away. No one will ever know. Joseph, handsome, young, he refuses. But day after day, she's luring and enticing him. And time after time, he resists until one day she's grabbing Joseph. He runs, leaving behind his cloak. She falsely clamors, "Hey! He forced himself upon me," and Joseph winds up in an Egyptian cell. Things don't always work out like you expect. A favorite servant to a falsely accused prisoner. Again, even in prison, everything Joseph touched prospered. Everything that he was put in charge of. And he sort of even began interpreting some of these dreams for his fellow prisoners. There were two there who were fallen civil servants with Pharaoh. Right? He interpreted their dreams. Eventually, these civil servants are released, and much later, Pharaoh's having all these troubled dreams. Joseph's still in prison. These dreams are really disturbing. I'm not sure what's going on here. No one can interpret these dreams. The civil servant remembers, Joseph's in prison. They bring him out. He easily and accurately interprets these dreams. He goes so far to suggest a way to avoid the impending disaster, this coming famine that's on its way. Right? Pharaoh agrees to the plan, elevates Joseph to number 2 position. Things don't always work out as you expect. From a prison to a deputy Pharaoh. One more little series of episodes in this long story of Joseph. Severe famine encompasses the entire region. Everyone, nation after nation of a nation, are flocking to Egypt for grain, which they've stored and saved under Joseph's leadership. In this multitude, this procession of nations coming before Egyptian-garbed Joseph, finally he recognizes a couple of 10 folk coming down the aisle here. Right? It's his brothers coming here. They bow before him. This dream comes true. The elder bowing before the younger, Joseph's forgotten dream. Right? They ask for grain. He accuses them, "You're spies. You're here just to check us out and to count our horses and to count our chariots." No, we're not spies. We're not spies. Yes, you are. We're just people. We have a younger brother, he's Benjamin, and we have a father, Joseph. And he's like, "We're not going to believe you until you go back and bring Benjamin. We'll sort of verify your story." So off they go, back. And while they're back there with Jacob, they say, "We got to take Benjamin back." Jacob's like, "No way. You cannot take this boy away from me." Jacob refuses until everyone is starving. The only option is to go back to Egypt. They bring Benjamin back. They're grateful that he is there. And so they bow before Joseph again. He throws them this big party. And then, I don't understand how all this works, but he plants stolen goods in their grain sacks. And so he puts it out there. He even planted this, framed Joseph for stealing this silver cup. And after some moments of tense negotiation back and forth, Joseph finally reveals himself, his identity to his brothers. "I'm Joseph." And they're a little afraid. He assures them, "Hey, time after time I am with you." They return home to Jacob, say, "Hey, Joseph's alive, our long-lost brother." Right? And Jacob rejoices, and he and his entire household and all his possessions, they come to Egypt. And at Joseph's request, they settle in the land of Goshen, the most prosperous, the most promising, the most productive land in the region. Things don't always work out like you expect. You don't expect to look up from a pit with your brothers looking down. You don't expect to be a slave and then everything you do prosper. You don't expect to be falsely accused and find yourself in prison, and even everything in prison sort of going beyond your dreams. You don't expect to be invited to interpret a dream for Pharaoh. And you don't expect to be elevated to deputy Pharaoh. You don't even expect to finally look down on your elder brothers begging for food, bowing before you. Things don't always work out as you expect. It's a long, long story for Joseph. I have one more piece and then we can talk. If you have the story, I invite you to turn to page 31. If you don't, I'm not sure where it is in the Bible, but it's in there somewhere. Sorry. Page 31. The second paragraph after the little space. We're paying attention to the Lord's role. The Lord was with Joseph, so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put them in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was upon everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar, he left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, no concern, except got to eat some food. Now, Joseph was well built and handsome. And after a while, his master's wife, she took notice of Joseph, and she said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Now, if you scan your eyes through this little section and you look for the word "the Lord," you'll notice some things it says. The Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with him. The Lord gave him success. The Lord blessed the household. The blessing of the Lord was on everything. And even when it comes to sinning at the bottom and sort of lying with Potiphar's wife, it's not about sinning against Potiphar. It's not about sinning against the wife. It's about sinning against the Lord. Page 32. On the third full paragraph, Joseph's now in prison. Begins, "But while Joseph was there in prison," is where we are on page 32. "But while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did." And again, notice the word "the Lord" in that paragraph. The Lord was with him. The Lord was with Joseph. Now, the point, thank you, Pastor, very much. Get somewhere, please. We're going to do the point responsive reading. All right, so I got my call, and you have the response. Call, response. Hopefully. Things don't always work out as we expect.
Yet the Lord remains with us.
I'm not convinced. Things don't always work out as we expect.
Yet the Lord remains with us.
Never forget that. Adversity is quite certain to come to us in one form or another. Charles Wesley Naylor wrote this many, many years ago. He said, "We ought to be ready to meet it bravely, confidently, and resourcefully, so that we shall not be overwhelmed." And Naylor was well acquainted with grief, things not always working out as he expected. He was born in 1874 in Ohio. His mother died when he was 8 years old. He ended up living with his grandparents. Anybody here raising grandchildren? Nothing new under the sun, okay? Welcome to the world. He was originally a part of the Methodist Church, but introduced to the Church of God in 1892, and he became a part of the congregation there in Ohio. Over the course of the next 4 years, he sort of dealt with this call, wrestled with what God is calling him to do, in and out and back and forth. And so finally, he sensed God calling him to full-time Christian service, and by faith, he left Ohio and he moved to Michigan, Grand Junction, Michigan, where he joined a publishing house called the Gospel Trumpet Company. And there, he spent his time sort of going out with evangelistic teams to do services and to sort of proclaim the word, and also working in the office. Everything went fine. 1908, he's out on one of these trips, sort of spreading the gospel and all those kinds of things, in Sydney, Florida. And Charles is helping with the timbers that take down the big tents, the big camp meetings we used to hold, right? And he was seriously injured while he's taking down this tent. he dislocated a kidney. I don't know how you repair that in 2015. I don't know how you repair a dislocated kidney in 1908. I don't know how that worked. But eventually he began healing and be getting better. And just as he was sort of coming off of that, he was in a serious bus accident and he was bedridden for the rest of his life. He was 35 years old. Things don't always work out as we expect. An ardent worker for the Lord, dedicated to the Lord, now confined, silenced, stilled to the bed. As a young boy, his name was Ding. He's from Vietnam. Decided to become a follower of Jesus, which was really a very unpopular decision in his native country. Yet he loved the Lord. He desired to serve the Lord as best he could. And Ding worked as an elevator operator. One day, he's installing a lift on the 12th floor, and the power suddenly comes on and something shifts, and he's thrown into the well, and he falls to the bottom, 12 floors down. And he's not sure how he survived this fall, but he remembers trying to get up, and he cannot get up. There's this dull ache on his right side, and he looks down at his feet, and just below his knee, his leg and feet are severed. They're not there. He looks up, and tangled in the wire are his leg and feet hanging. Right? And so he saw this going on. Things don't work out as you expect. His coworkers, they saw this. They quickly grabbed that leg, right? They wrapped that severed leg in ice, and they rushed him and their friend to the ER and to the hospital. And the doctor spent 18 hours reattaching the leg. Week after a week, gangrene set in. Doctor said, we got to amputate. The company said, we're not paying for that. Forced the doctors to perform 9 further surgeries on this leg that saved it, but it was unusable. Things don't always work out as we expect. This productive worker, now lame walker. Back to Charles. In the pit of despair, one day, Charles recalls. It was a cold winter morning, and snow covered the ground. The frost on the trees sparkled as the bright sunlight like 10,000 diamonds, but the brightness outside seemed to find no reflection in me. And I'm confident, I'm confined to my bed, but for more than 6 months, and I'm gloomy and despondent. It seemed as though the light, the joy, had gone out of my life. The only pain and only suffering and only sorrow were left in me. I had no desire to live. And I lay there brooding, melancholy. A cardinal, he writes, in his bright red plumage alighted on a tree a few feet from my window, and his eyes sparkled. He gazed at me with interest. He turned his head now this way and now that, apparently studying me intently. And he gave a cheery call, and he hopped near me as near as he could get, and repeated his cries over and over. And this is what he said: you. Cheer up. Cheer up. It seemed as though God had sent this little bird to bring my soul a message, he said. And I begin to think of all the good things, all the favorable things that are going on in my life. I begin to say how many things the Lord has bestowed upon me. His mercy, His kindness, His blessing. And my heart took some courage. Respond with me. Things don't always work out as we expect. Dean spent 4 years learning to walk again in therapy. And his leg remained stiff and painful and really unusable, although his faith grew stronger and stronger. And one day, Friday evening prayer meeting at the Church of God there, Dean was moved to come to the altar and pray. Obediently, he walked down and he prayed. He knelt down to pray, and it was only after he returned to his seat he realized, hey, I can use my leg again. And believe it or not, he was actually fully, totally healed in that moment. Respond with me. Things don't always work out as we expect.
Yet the Lord remains with us.
And I invite you to hear Shelby's story. Any sounds?
Nope.
Nathan? Should be. Could be. My hope is in the name of the Lord, maker of heaven and earth. My hope is not in the technology. That's right, brother. Yet the Lord remains with us.
I think you're out of luck.
That's the best news I've heard all day, Nathan. Thank you. In any event, she tells a story. This girl, her name is Shelby. She tells a story of her sort of athleticism and plays softball and all this kind of stuff, and how she was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy. And she just tells this beautiful story and a testimony of how God remains good and with her, even though this is sort of an unhealable thing, physical condition she will live with the rest of her life. It's really beautiful, moving. You should all cue up some tears right now. It's a beautiful story, Pastor. Thank you. So, things don't always work out as we expect. Joseph went from a favorite son to a slave. He went from a slave to a falsely accused prisoner. He went from a prisoner to a deputy Pharaoh. And in that reign, in that place, he is able to save neighboring nations, including Israel, preserving God's promise to build a nation to reclaim this broken and sad world. This Shelby, she goes from an athlete who struggles to an athlete on the sideline. Dean goes from a productive worker to a lame walker. Things don't always work out as we expect, but the Lord remains with us. And Charles Naylor, he writes that he was feeling rather discouraged, but he could not be in the work. As he lay in his bed, there's no place for his usefulness. And finally, in his meditation, he said, well, if I can do nothing, I'm the Lord's anyway. And from this heart, warmed with gratitude, he began writing, whether I live or die, whether I wake or sleep, whether I'm on the land or in the stormy deep, when 'tis serene and calm, when the wild winds blow, I shall not be afraid. I am the Lord's, I know. And from our lower story perspective, we can't always see what God's up to in his upper stories. And sometimes we spend years waiting for God to answer prayer. And sometimes that prayer comes, and sometimes that answer to prayer does not come. But in this broken and sad world, things do not work out as we expect. It does not mean that God has abandoned us. It does not mean that God has forgotten us. It doesn't mean that somehow he's lost track of us. And maybe things aren't working out for you as you expect in your marriage. It might be a bit more challenging or difficult than you realized it would be. The Lord is with you. Things might not be working out in terms of your children, maybe your grandchildren, but the Lord remains with you. There may be hopes and dreams that you have for your life, for this world. They're not working out as you anticipated them, but the Lord remains with you. And things may not even be working out in terms of your job, or you're questioning your finances and all that kind of business. The Lord remains with you. What I know is that God is a tender-hearted, loving Father. And he has broad shoulders of Jesus Christ. And there are outstretched arms that can comfort us. They pick us up. They set us on solid ground. Jesus comes to us in our distress. He comes to us when we are down. And when God shows up, things begin to change. Sometimes the circumstances change. Sometimes the change is right here. Let's sing this together.
Whether I live or die, whether I wake or sleep, whether upon the land or in a stormy deep, when 'tis serene and calm, or when the wild winds blow, I shall not be afraid. I am the Lord's, I know. When with abundant store, or in deep poverty, and when the world may smile, or it may frown on me, when it shall help me on, or shall obstruct my way, still shall my heart rejoice. I am the Lord's today. When I am safe at home, or in a foreign land, when on a nice-bound shore, or on a sunlit strand, when on the mountain height, or in the valley low, still doth he care for me. I am the Lord's, I know. Nothing shall separate from his unbounded love, neither in depths below, nor in the heights above, and in the years to come, he will abide with me. I am the Lord's, I know, for all eternity.